Hello, everyone. Welcome to this video on the Ecosystem Services Tool from Farm2Facts. I'm Gabriel Wilkins. I'm a graduate student here with the Kaufman Lab. And with me today is Stephen Quass, who's done a lot of work on the Ecosystem Services Tool to kind of help explain what it is, how it works, and show a little bit about behind the scenes of the data set. So I'll pass it on to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, as Gabriel was mentioning, this is the Ecosystem Services Tool. And I guess the first question that you might be wondering is what actually are ecosystem services? And the way you can think of them is they're just the many benefits that ecosystems and the broader environment provide to people. So for example, it'll help with water filtration, erosion prevention, and nutrient cycling. So these are just some examples of what ecosystem services actually are. And then the reason for this tool, the development of this tool, was that farms do a lot of great things for their ecosystems. But at the time, there just wasn't any way to quantify it. There were some tools available for larger scale farmers, but there weren't any available that could actually quantify the beneficial impacts that small scale farmers, so the kind of farmers that you see at your local farmers market, have on their ecosystems. So for that reason, a team of Farm2Facts students worked on the development of the Ecosystem Services Tool. So what they did is they spoke to a number of farmers, and in these conversations with the farmers, they identified 6 different categories or ways that farms support ecosystem services. So these are soil health, livestock, farm infrastructure and machinery, hauling to markets, biodiversity, and alternative power. So the tool is divided into these 6 sections. And what it does is it actually quantifies the way that farmers are helping the environment or their local ecosystems with regard to each of these 6 categories. It also allows farmers to actually market their these benefits to customers. And then lastly, it allows farmers to track goals for building sustainability and maintaining sustainability on their farm. So with that, we can move on to actually using the tool. So I can pause. Go home. Okay. So when you go to farm2facts.org, this is what the website will look like. So to get to the Ecosystem Services Tool, what you do is you go to the top left corner, the What Do We Do, and you click ESS Tool. It'll take you to a page like this. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you have 3 options. Either I'm a new producer, so that'd be if you were a farmer. I'm a new market manager. You click that if you were a market manager. And then if you have an existing Farm2Facts account, you can just click right there. So I'll do that and I'll log in. And then it'll take you to a page like this. So to get to the Ecosystem Services tool from here, what you do is you go and click Collect Data, and it'll drop down and you can click Ecosystem Services. And it'll take you to a page like this. So I've already entered some data, but if you hadn't already entered data, there should be a box that says enter your data. So I'll click edit my data or edit your data, and then it will take me to a page like this. So I've already filled it out, and this is based off of some of the farmers that I've spoken with during my time piloting the tool. So the first question, the first section is just a brief introduction of the farm. So these are some really general questions about the farm itself. So the first question is, what's the distribution of acreage on your farm? Either owned acres, you can just type in whatever number you want. Leased acres, again, this is one important thing to note here is that these are specifically acres that you lease from someone else. And one thing that I'm doing right now is I'm highlighting this question mark next to leased acres. And a lot of the questions have this question mark next to the question. And what it does is it explains what the question is asking. So if you're confused about something, you can just hover over the question mark and it'll tell you how you should be approaching this question. So for example, this is specifically, you are the leasee, not the leaser. So it helps clarify any questions that you might. And then the next question is about the cultivated acres. So how many acres of the farmland that you actually grow crops on? And then finally, how many acres do you graze livestock on? The next question asks what category of product you sell at market or wherever else you might sell your products. So meats, eggs, dairy, fruits and vegetables, just has a whole bunch of categories. And again, if you have any question about what it might mean, you can always hover over the question mark. So the final question in this category is, do you practice any of these agricultural systems on your farm? And you can have a bunch of options to choose from. And again, if you do have any questions about what they mean, you just hover over the question mark. One thing I will note, if you hover over the question mark over organic, it's especially important to note this, that you don't actually have to be organic certified to check the organic box. Because if you're doing the organic practices, whether or not you're certified doesn't really matter because you're still helping the ecosystem, whether or not you're organic certified. All right, so moving down, we're now at the first category, the soil health practices. So the first question here is, do you practice diversified crop rotations with 3 or more crops? And you can just select from the drop-down box, yes, no. And then the next question is, what percentage of your farm is covered in perennials? Again, you can just type in this question. And here, perennials just means anything that lives longer than 2 or more years. So it could include grass, trees, that sort of thing. And the next, do you practice intercropping? So that would mean growing 2 plants next to each other to sort of benefit, so that they will benefit from that symbiotic relationship between the 2 plants. And this will help. This is used pretty widely, and it can also help with the soil. The next question is whether or not you use reduced till or no till on your farm. And again, you can just select from the drop-down box, yes or no. And then the next 2 questions are about cover crops. So the first question is about a flowering cover crop. So if you want examples of what that might mean, you can hover over the question mark and it'll give you buckwheat, field peas, a whole bunch of different options to choose from. And if you do grow those, you can just think about what percentage of your harvested crop will receive those as a cover crop. And then the same thing down here, but it's for non-flowering cover crops. So again, you can see what those might include. And then the next question is about organic amendments. So you could choose yes or no, whether or not you apply those. And then the second to last question is about weed control methods. So black plastic, hand hoeing, straw mulch. I selected those. And then finally, the last question for this section is about the different chemical inputs. So fertilizer, herbicide, insecticide, or fungicide. So one thing I will note here is this is only talking about synthetic chemical inputs. So if you use organic or natural fertilizer, then that wouldn't count here. But again, you would enter in how many acres of land you'd use, say, fertilizer over. And then you can select the frequency or how often per year you use, say, the fertilizer or herbicide. All right, so that's the first section done. So you can click next to go on to the next page, and it will give you first the the second category of alternative power. So this is a really short category. It just asks, what types of alternative power do you have? And if you have one from this list, you check it. And then if you don't have any, you could just uncheck it and leave this whole section blank. That's totally fine. In this demo, I'm going to have it checked. And I'm going to say that 50% of my farm will be fueled by alternative power. So that's it for the alternative power section. So now we can move on to livestock. So the livestock section starts off first with just a bunch of different options of livestock that you can choose from. And then it'll ask you, enter in the number of livestock for that specific category. And then how many acres do you graze that particular type of livestock on? So for this example, I'm going to say I have 150 goats and I graze them on 5 acres. So then the next question is, what percentage of feed comes from on-farm sources? So that would mean if you actually grow your own feed instead of having it shipped in or anything like that. And this is just asking about ways of reducing carbon emissions in the actual transportation process. All right, so the next question is how you graze your livestock. So continuous or set stock, meaning it's just sort of in one pasture. Rotational, meaning it's you rotate the crop, or sorry, you rotate the livestock from different pastures, either weekly or monthly, or hourly to daily. And then there's also an option that you don't graze your livestock at all. The next question is whether or not you follow a nutrient management plan. Again, you can just choose yes or no. Then it asks if you have integrated crops and livestock. And then finally, whether or not you keep animals away from sensitive areas. All right, so that's the livestock section. Now we can move on to hauling to markets. So the first question here is just how many miles per week do you bring your products to market? So this is a round trip. So this means to the market and back per week for all of the markets that you might bring your products to. The next question asks, how many markets do you bring your products to? And it has a bunch of different examples. So healthcare facilities, institutions, restaurants, just a bunch of different examples. And then one thing I will note is that if you have a CSA, you can just do one, and then it'll ask down here, how many members do you have? And you can put that in there. All right, so the last question in this section is, it asks about what your primary vehicle that you use to haul products to market is. So you can choose from any of these, and if you have multiple, you could choose, say if you use both a gas-powered and an electric vehicle to bring your products to market, you can choose both of them. All right, but for this demo, I'll only do gas-powered. So then the next section is about farm infrastructure and machinery. So the first question here is how many annual kilowatt hours do you use on your farm for temperature control or illumination infrastructure? So as it says, you might be able to find this information on an energy bill. So say for this demo, 2,000 kilowatt hours. But again, if you are not sure exactly how much you use, there's also this option to check not sure, because that can be something that is difficult to know for sure. All right, so the next question asks about your annual fuel usage for all farm tractors and equipment. And it has a bunch of different types of fuel to choose from. So fossil diesel, biodiesel, fossil gasoline, LPG. And you can just enter in the number of gallons that you use for each of those categories. And if you don't use any, say, biodiesel, you can just enter in 0. All right, the next question asks about whether or not you irrigate. And similar to above with the farm infrastructure, you can enter in how many kilowatt hours you use to irrigate. Again, this is something that you might not know the answer to, so you can just check not sure if you're not totally sure about how many kilowatt hours you use. And then finally, the last question is what type of irrigation do you use? And you can choose from any of these. You can choose more than one if you use more than one kind of irrigation. And if you have any confusion, if you have any, if you're wondering what any of these kinds of irrigation might be, you can just hover over the question mark and it'll give an explanation about them. All right, so we're in the final stretch. This is the last category, biodiversity. So it starts off by asking how many acres of the farm are used for conservation, either formally or informally. So formally would mean if you actually are part of, say, an NRCS program, and informally would mean if you just use that land for conservation or just sort of set it aside and let it do its thing. And then the next question is how many acres of that land that you use for conservation are intentionally maintained to support wildlife. So again, you just type in how many acres are used to support wildlife. The next question asks how many or which ways does your farm foster biodiversity? And it gives a bunch of different options that you can choose from for how your farm fosters biodiversity. And again, if you have any questions, some of these things you might not be sure what they mean, and you can just hover over the question mark and it'll give a great explanation. In addition, you can always enter in other kinds of ways that you foster biodiversity on your farm. All right. Then the last three questions are, do you use integrated pest management practices? And you can choose yes or no. Do you use flowers within your cropping system? And then finally, do you allow crop weeds to persist? So what that means is, for example, if you have milkweed pop up on your farm, do you pick it or do you allow it to keep growing? All right. And then the last two sort of mini questions are just, first off, future goals and aspirations. So how do you want to see your farm improve in terms of sustainability in the future? And this will allow you to say, 5 years, you can look back and see what were my future goals, what were my aspirations, and how have I been doing? How was I able to actually accomplish them, and what progress have I made? And it's really useful for record keeping and just actually being able to track these goals. And then finally, the last section or question, I suppose, is about feedback. If you have any ways that you think this tool could be improved, we would love to hear it. And then the tool can be continually made better and better. All right, so that was the end of filling out the tool. So once you're done, you can click Submit. All right, so after clicking Submit, it'll take me to this page right here, and this is the results page. So as it says right here, farms are rated on a score of good, better, or best in terms of the 6 categories. And the reason why it's good, better, or best is because, quite frankly, all of the farms that use this tool are doing great things for their local ecosystems. So we're trying to highlight that with our tier system. So based off of the data that I inputted, it's said for the soil health that I'm given a rating of best. Similarly, for alternative power, I'm given a rating of best. And then what's also really great about this tool is that, say, for example, for hauling to markets, I was only given a score of good. So what the tool does is it also says that it gives a bunch of different ways that you could actually improve your farm in terms of sustainability for these specific categories. So for example, it recommends batching trips to markets to minimize the total miles driven each week. So in doing so, it provides a way, maybe you're not sure about certain ways to improve, biodiversity. It gives a bunch of different ideas that you can draw from and really just improve the sustainability of your farm. Finally, one thing that I will mention is that we have a PDF version of the ESS tool as well. So this is really great. So if you're going out and using the ecosystem services tool actually in the field where you might not have an internet connection, you can print this out and you can fill it out. And it's the same questions. And what you can do later is then you can go back and input it in online in the tool. One thing I will note about this paper version is that it has at the very end, right here, a glossary. So where the online tool had the little question marks that you could hover over, the PDF version has a glossary. So if you're not sure what something means, you can just check back in the glossary and it'll go into really great detail about what a specific question is asking for and how you should be answering that question. So it's super helpful in that regard. All right, so that that has been the demo of the Ecosystem Services Tool, and I hope this helps in filling out the tool.
Thanks so much, Stephen.
Yeah.
And again, if any other questions crop up, we do have office hours here at Farm2Facts where we can help answer questions, and we're always reachable through email and what have you. So if you have confusion or you have those suggestions and maybe you want to make them in that way, that's also available.